How much food do you throw away every week? And do you have to? That's today's big question. And my guest is Matt Rogers. Matt is a former Apple, iPod, and iPhone engineer, the co-founder of Nest Thermostats, founder of Insight.org, and former chairman of Carbon180. He is now the co-founder and CEO of Mill. What's Mill? Well, it's a membership to a food shrinking, de-stinking kitchen bin. And it just may be one of the most important levers you and I can take to fight food waste and climate change. Welcome to Important Not Important.
Like, we have some really large challenges that require like astronomical scientific breakthrough.
Sure.
Like grand challenges of humanity kind of breakthrough. Like how to do nuclear fusion at, like atmospheric levels, and like
the people are like, look, how do we make steel like with clean energy? That's actually gonna be really hard.
Really hard. Or like, exactly. Or like, how to remove CO2 from the air without using too much energy to do it.
Right.
Things that are really, really hard. And like this is like, let's call it like one of the grand challenges of humanity, but it's kind of dumb. It's like preventing food from going in the trash. It's like when you put it that way, like this is what we have to do. Like surely we can do this. Like can't we just call everybody up and say, hey, like, FYI, we got to stop putting food in the trash. It's really important, and like we can surely do that.
Right.
But like when you get down to it, like even in like the most well-meaning households, and like I'll raise my hand on this one. Like Swati and I live in a very climate-forward household.
Sure.
I mean, like we tried to do the right thing with food waste, and we had one of those countertop pails.
Yeah.
And when the fruit flies moved in 2020, that was it.
There were a few like rougher memories my children have than like dad's fight against the fruit flies for like 6 months in 2021. It's awful. Yep. They never leave.
They never leave. And you buy this like yellow sticky paper and you kind of hang it all over the house. And like they stick to it, but like there's always more fruit flies.
Yeah.
So like it's kind of like out of that frustration, they're like, oh, like surely like we could build a better system. And stepping back a little bit, like part of what Harry, my partner, and I had to go through is acknowledging like that food waste will exist.
Sure.
Like even if we perfectly engineer refrigeration and like your point about appeal, like making fruits and vegetables last a really long time, food waste is inevitable. And like banana peels, for example, like we're not going to eat banana peels.
Yeah.
And I've got 2 little kids, and embarrassingly half of what we feed them ends up on the floor.
Oh,
and,
for sure.
Yeah, the dog's going to eat some of it, but not all of it. So like figuring out a system where we can make that part really easy and not gross, so that, effectively we're going to call up every household on the planet and saying, hey, like, don't need to throw your food in the trash anymore. We've got a new way.
I mean, again, it makes so much sense, right? Again, the half the reason I do this work, most of the reason is people just going like, what can I do? And it sounds insane to say to them, please stop throwing all your food in the trash. Like, just eat it. Or just keep eating it. The expiration dates, whole other podcast. Like most of them aren't real. Like ignore it. Ugly fruit, great, still good. Cut off the piece. It's annoying.
Delicious. Cook it.
Right. But this is when people's eyes glaze over because they're like, one, that's super annoying because like you said, it's gross. Food waste actually gets gross. 2, they're like, that can't be the thing of all the things that's causing the problems. I'm like, no, it is. It's a big fucking part of it. And it's 100% on us.
Yes. Yeah, and this is another one that I often hear, especially since Mill launched a few months ago, is, like food waste, that must be a grocery store or restaurant problem. And they're frankly in the business of not wasting food. Like, it's like they run razor thin margins. Yeah. Like, they're very well incentivized to not waste food. And looking at US data, about half of food waste and loss is us at home. It really is like unfortunately, a consumer problem. Because again, like today we don't really have another option.
You're right. It's interesting, right? Because again, the supply chain needs a lot of work. There's a lot of broken pieces along the way.
Yeah.
In the sense of like control what you can control, but also having context and empathy for these things. Like you said, grocery stores, yes, on the one hand, we have incentivized them to sell the most beautiful produce, but they're trying not to waste any of this. Restaurants, never invest in a restaurant. They're great. But if you've ever worked in one and you've like taken a plate back and you have to tell the chef someone won't eat it, look at the disappointment in their eyes because they know like that is wasted food. And the margins, like you said, are non-existent. But when you or I throw some moldy Dave's bread in the trash, right? Because we were gone for a week or we just ignored it and the kids were picky and didn't want to eat it that week, but they ate it the week before. We don't do that math. And I want to talk a little bit about Mill from that perspective because it's not cheap necessarily, but at the same time, and this is half of my job is talking to people about what they're exposed to and risk and the real costs and how we haven't paid them. You pay for your trash one way or another.
That's right. And and whether you pay for it every month or it's part of your rent or it's on your property taxes, I think the latest data I saw is in the US, we spend about $200 billion a year managing waste. Like $200 billion. That's like military level budget.
Right. But we also
throw stuff away.
But we're still not paying the cost of the diesel trucks and the landfill and all that shit. So the point is like you and I don't have a little reader. Like a restaurant knows like every piece of fish that you throw in the trash is like a piece that we wasted that we paid for. We don't really do that because we're trying to feed the children something they'll eat. How did you get to reinventing the trash can, to Mill, to kind of bypassing compost almost, to all this, and then deciding, hey, this is going to be the business model for it? Talk us kind of through how you get there.
So again, it started with how can we make a better experience at home?
Yeah.
And like going to our own personal experience, trying to do the right thing with food waste and trying to compost. If you could solve the fruit fly problem, the rat problem, the smell problem, actually the rest becomes a lot easier.
Yeah.
And we had spoken in the early days of the company to a lot of experts. And this was a cool thing about starting a company in the pandemic in 2020 is like you could reach out to anybody. Everyone was around. Yeah, like we would call like professors at UW who are experts in this, and like everyone would answer their phone, like, "Oh yeah, I'm available."
Sure.
So we got a lot of really good input as we're starting, and what we learned is even in cities that are doing everything right, that have a green bin program that the city provides, participation rates are really low. Really quite low. And if you look at actually in the trash, you'd still find most of the food in the trash stream.
Sure.
And if you look at what comes out of their compost stream, it's also full of contamination.
Sure.
And if you've ever bought like a truck full of compost for your garden, you'd find plastic everywhere.
Yeah.
So like the more we looked at it, this is a consumer behavior problem. It felt a lot like what we used to do at Nest. Like, can you make a beautiful experience that's easy and just awesome? Just a better experience. We're like,
fun.
We know how to do that.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of how we built the early days of the company. It was like, let's build the best freaking trash can that's ever existed that could take food waste and make it not gross. And that's how we started. And as we were accomplishing that in our own development, we realized, the stuff we're making is super valuable. By drying out food, by making it not gross, we're effective, like the Appeal story. We're making food that's shelf stable and lasts a long time.
Yeah.
So if you're making smallified food that's shelf stable, what stuff can you do with food? You could feed it to somebody.
Can I pause? What
Sure.
was the inflection? Did you aim for sort of better compost at one point and then sort of pivot to this mechanism, or like because it isn't? It to be clear, folks, like it isn't that at all. And we're going to get into the whole thing you're doing, but there's actually a pretty clear delineation, and it's not something that's really been attempted. So I'm just curious, like when it went that way.
So we looked at all sorts of technologies and techniques to make food not gross.
Right.
That was kind of like from like a product manager perspective.
Sure.
Like those were our key goals. Like, can we make it not gross? And the fastest path to making things not gross is you take the water out. When you take the water out, all those bacterial processes stop. Like digestion doesn't happen when things are dry. And like if you build, I think like the analogies of the world, I always think about analogies. Brewing beer, right? Like when you add the water to the mix, that's when the fermentation happens.
Sure.
When it's dry, like the yeast are dormant. And the same is true with our food. If it's dry, those fungi, those bacteria don't do anything. They're all dormant. And when it's wet, that's when the gloopiness happens. That's when the VOCs get released. When it's dry, it's no big deal. So as we were starting the company, we looked at all sorts of different techniques to make food not gross. And this was the absolute fastest path. Like, you could dry food in a couple hours. And like, once you realize that, you're like, oh, I could do it. I could dry food in a couple hours. That's the fastest path to make it not gross at home. And once you've made it dry, like, what are the great things you could do with it? And that's what led us to this path of like, oh, can we make feed for animals?
Because I imagine that realization point, and again, I want to talk about that now, but it's a little like, careful, because once you pull this string, there's a whole fucking sweater on the other end, which is like,
that's right.
You guys have opened yourself up to like a lot of logistics. It's not just like, hey, make food for animals and then ask people to put in the right bin, because it's clear we don't do that, right? We don't. There's no self-serve. Like, we don't do that. Like, so now you're like, shit. Now I got to solve that too. Again, what was that moment when you're like, all right, well, I guess we're going down this road. We got to do all the rest of that, because the beauty of a thermostat is you turn it and you're like, my job's done here, right?
That's what, like, actually, and you nailed it. This is exactly our thought process. So if you kind of were in the early days of Mill, late 2020, early 2021, that was our hypothesis. Like, oh, like, we could dry this stuff out and you could put it in your green bin at home.
Sure.
Or you could use it in your garden. And you can make compost for your plants. And then we did a lot more research, and we're like, oh, only 5% of U.S. homes have a green bin program.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not going to work.
Right.
Yeah. And frankly, most people don't have the space and time to make compost for a garden, and let alone all the urban centers that exist around the country. So, as you start unraveling the sweater, we're like, oh, so we got to come collect this stuff.
Right.
We can't leave it to chance for it to end up in the landfill. So let's come collect it. And then once you come collect it, what are you going to do?
About that program, how does it work? How will it work?
So we do the full end to end. We make the bin for your kitchen that makes it not gross. We come and collect it from your doorstep with a partnership with the U.S. Postal Service. We don't actually have to come drive our own trucks to get it. There are trucks that come to your house every day anyway.
So weird.
And then, yeah, right?
I mean, that's,
indeed.
By the way, that's literally the Netflix DVD model. They were just like, you already get the mail.
You already get the mail. Like, nobody can come drop it off. Like, yeah, exactly. And the U.S. Postal Service is one of the most efficient logistics networks in the country.
Sure.
They go everywhere every day. So let's get it back to us so that we can process it and get it to farms to feed animals, namely chickens to start with. We do the entire full loop. And to your point, like, we end up unraveling the whole sweater because we realize each step of this chain doesn't exist today. That we'd have to do it all ourselves to start with.
You can't, I imagine you in full faith with, because I know, the scope of your involvement in trying to build a better planet through companies and philanthropy and all these different things. I imagine there was no version for you and your co-founder of like, let's just do the trash can and they'll figure out the rest. Like, I don't think you could have left it at that, right?
I mean, I wish we could have.
Right.
It would have been a hell of a lot easier. Right. It would have been a lot easier. It would have been a lot easier for us to say, hey, like, let's just build a better bin. That would be awesome.
Sure.
But like, that would leave too much up to chance. And I think about like a household like ours that lives in an urban center, a very well-meaning household, but what are we going to do with hundreds of pounds of dried food? Got to have someone to come pick it up and take it off our hands and do something great with it. So we're doing the whole end to end. And I mean, like, once we realized that we are going to build the whole end to end, like, all of a sudden the scope of the company got a lot bigger. So
I think one of the things that people will love about this, and again, I understand the initial, and this is where we've just got to help people understand the greater context of like what our actions cost, like both directly and indirectly, which we put our head in the sand about. And now here we are, is I understand the initial looking at something like this, or for example, a Lumi, which me and my wife and my kids and I have. Problem with the Lumi is it's great, and then it actually, the resulting matter still tastes like food, so your dogs go eat it, which is super annoying. Anyways, the point is, you have kind of almost invented a and are building the distribution for a new sort of version of one of these circular economies, right? Which it's easy to say the circular economy, but as you know, from e-waste to whatever, there's 1,000 different versions of these things. So why chicken feed? Why does this really matter to the greater sort of fight? And why specifically, how did you get to like, oh, we can heat this shit up and we can dry it out? Why did you go that way?
Yeah. So think about like the circular economy. We're building loops.
Yeah.
And when you look at loops, you want to make the tightest loop you can. And I think like Bill McDonough's book, Cradle to Cradle, as a really good kind of reference point for like people in their mind. The tighter the loop you make, the less loss there is along the loop. For every step along the way, thermodynamics plays into effect, and you have loss, right? Like really getting kind of in the weeds. So the tighter the loop, the less loss. And you could take food and feed it to microbes to then feed the soil to grow plants to then feed animals to feed humans. That's kind of the best loop that we have today as a society. And that's a good loop. That's much better than landfill to methane in the atmosphere, which is poison. But we thought about like, what is the tightest loop we could do? You take the food that we don't eat and feed it directly to somebody else. And ideally you could feed it to a person. But like, I don't think that's probably a good idea with, the things that we don't eat in our kitchen.
Sure.
Like, cans, packaged goods, please donate to a food bank.
Yep.
But like the banana peels and apple cores, the best thing to do with those would be to feed it to somebody else.
Sure.
In that case, chickens, because we have, I hate to say it's like unlimited chickens on the planet.
I mean, the actual number might as well be unlimited. It's obscene.
It's unlimited. Like 8 billion chickens in the US. It's like a mind-boggling number. And even this is already like mind-blowing stats. Like if we collect all of the food waste for the entire country, we would be like a single-digit percentage of the chicken feed market. So I often get asked this, especially like by the investment community, of like, oh, like one day, like you must, you're going to satisfy the whole chicken feed market, and like, what's that going to do? I'm like, no, you don't understand how many chickens there are out there. We will never satisfy the chicken feed market.
That's incredible.
So you think about like the thermodynamics of that. Like we dry the food, and we don't need to like process it further. Basically, we filter it and we pasteurize it, and that's what gets fed to the chickens. It gets mixed in with their normal diet, with the corn and the soy and the wheats of the world. But like we don't need to further process it. It keeps all those nutrients. We don't need to transform it further.
Well, I mean, we've been drying food for astronauts for 75 years, right? I mean, it retains its nutritional value. We know that.
That's
the
right.
ice cream. It's so great. So again, on the pulling the sweater thing, you're not just now going, okay, now we got to work with U.S. Postal Service to pick this stuff up, and we got to give you the boxes and the subscriptions. We can give you the boxes. Now we're going to make it into chicken feed. That's great. At some point, one of you two has to open the Google Doc and go, talk to factory farms about chicken feed, which is a bullet point that is much more involved than it seems like. So tell me about that part of it. Because again, each step along the way, you're just like, oh, okay, here we go.
Indeed. Oh yeah, this sweater has got a lot of threads. So to start with, we're going to partner with, small to mid-sized family farms that think about animal welfare and have free-range birds. Yeah. Our first partner being up in the Pacific Northwest, where our first feed processing facility is. And again, like there are a lot of chickens out there. Even like a small to mid-sized farm has millions of chickens. Right. So it's a lot. So, I mean, we're a ways away from getting to like the Purdue's and Tyson's of the world.
Yeah.
But at some point, like at scale, like, like we want to be feeding all of the chickens.
Sure.
And that's how we make a difference on climate. And like for a chicken producer, for a poultry farm, I think 60% of their emissions is the feed they feed the birds. It's a little bit different than like a cattle producer, where the burps are a majority of the emissions.
Right.
For a poultry farmer, the feed is the source of emissions. So by mixing in our food grounds and by mitigating all those methane emissions that would have happened, actually, like we're effectively making a carbon neutral feed for a poultry manufacturer.
And is that their incentive, or is there compensation coming this way? Do they get paid to take your feed? Do they pay you to take their feed? Because we don't have anywhere near standardized regulations on methane emissions from farms and shit like that, because we can't get our act together. So I would think they're a little forward looking on that part. I mean, please do it by all means, but the point is no one's under the gun yet.
Yes. So multi-pronged motivation, and getting to kind of company philosophy.
Please.
You want people to do the right thing, but like we don't rely on like people's like philanthropic and humanitarian instincts to drive this change. It also has to be like in their best interest. So we're going to make a nutritious feed ingredient that is full of protein and fat. It's the good stuff, and price it very competitively versus the corn and soy and wheats of the world. And yes, like you can meet your ESG goals as a company by buying this feed. But that's not the sole reason why you're doing it. It's also really nutritious.
It's super interesting because I feel like in all the research, and again, like you said, at best case scenario, you take everybody's trash. It's 6, 7, 8% of total chicken feed. So I understand why no one's focusing on it, but 6, 7, 8% of an ocean of chickens is a lot of fucking feed and chickens. So yes. I do wish there were more focus on this idea of the trash can is almost like a backwards way of making better chicken feed for the country and for the world. Because, for instance, looking at plant burgers and stuff like that, or the thermostat, like you said, there's a very small segment of people, and having done this for a while now, that are going to do this because it's the right thing to do. Everyone else, like, it's got to be a better burger. It's got to be literally a better thermostat, which Nest was. It was great, and I get Ecobee and all this shit. It's got to be better chicken feed, and it's got to be a little more reasonably cost. But that is the thing that's going to drive a huge impact, right?
Exactly. This is our entire philosophy. If we can make a better product, better for you at home, like, who likes stinky trash? No one wakes up saying, I love stinky trash.
Yeah.
I love those bags that rip and drip and leave a mess on my floor.
Literally, what is dripping? What is that? Like,
it's food waste.
Make it stop.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So like, no one likes that. So we can make a better experience at home, but we also can make a better feed product for farmers. And we effectively can connect those dots in that loop. That's what the company is all about. And if we're able to collect food waste from Americans and eventually globally to feed animals and eliminate methane emissions from landfill, that itself is the airline industry. Sure. Like methane emissions from landfill is like 2 to 3% of global emissions.
Huge. And methane's a nightmare. It gets up there and instantly things go that way with the heat.
That's right.
So again, it's funny. Like I've always been such a nerd about this. I was one of the first people with Nest and evangelizing it left and right and all this different stuff. And then you walk around the house and you're like, what other shit do we hate in our house that these guys could do? And then you did the smoke alarms, right? Of course, the trash can make so much sense, right? And of course, it's an entire consumer problem that we have self-created and keep inducing. But at the same time, with all the other stuff you have done over the years, ignoring the very convenient fact we're stuck at home with our trash, right? With all the other places you've invested in your work with Insight and things like this, you must have been and continue to be exposed to many, many, many good ideas where you could apply your very valuable time and ingenuity and resources, because this isn't a one-year gig. I mean, you know, right. iPod, Nest, these are chunks of your life. So why do you have to do this one?
I think just someone's got to do it. And I mean, one of the, when I put my insight, my investor hat on, you look at a problem and you look at team problem fit. Is this a team that has the skill sets to solve this problem? Is this a problem worth solving? And gosh, global food waste certainly is a big enough problem. And what's the impact? If we solve this problem, what's the output for humanity and for the planet? And man, this is one where the team problem fit is pretty extraordinary. There just are not a lot of former Apple teams working on food waste. There's not a lot of them.
Working on trash cans.
Yeah, it's the team that made the iPhone, they're working on trash cans now. You don't really hear that a lot. And one, it's kind of humorous, but I mean, that's what these problems need. They need the best teams on the planet working on them.
They do, and that's the whole, I'm going to misquote it. First it was finance, but it was the best minds of our generation are working on ad clicks, right? For 20 years. And
or crypto.
Yeah,
Or-
right. Or
yeah.
crypto. God damn it. Like, it's like, come on, please.
Don't get me
There's
started.
So many other cool things that could also make you a ton of money. You don't have to do those things, you know?
Yeah. That's right.
So how does this grow? Because again, we have CEOs and students and artists and product managers and everybody who engages with this looking to find their way of lateral move or graduating into something or starting a company or joining a company. Again, trying to answer this question of like, how do I give a shit? What do I do? When you start to pull these strings on the sweater, it gets complicated. The people you have to hire who need entirely different logistical proclivities than your team, as exceptional as your history has been, has ever really had. Because again, we just talked about all those different variations on it. I'm just so curious about how you are approaching that as running the company and as you're growing the company and tackling those pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, we had to think about it really differently. My old co-founder and I, Tony and I built Nest in the image of Apple.
Right.
That was kind of how we built the company. And with Mill, Harry and I had to do things differently. Knowing how complex this problem is, like, this is not an easy startup. So building the team, yes, we have this deep Apple Nest DNA around building great products and great experiences. But the other half of the company are like folks from Uber and Lyft. Think about like very disruptive, distributed businesses that, you know, like really surprise people. Like, I mean, now you take it for granted that like you can get anywhere just by pulling out your phone or get anything by pulling out your phone. But like 15 years ago, like we used to stand on the street corner with our arms
It's the sort
up.
of things I yell at my kids about all the time. I'm like, in my day, you know?
Yeah, we used to stand on the street corner with our arms up and hope someone would stop and pick us up.
And they wouldn't, right? They would not.
And they wouldn't, exactly. So, I mean, we built this team with really different DNA. So, you think about like deep product expertise from Apple and Nest, distributed infrastructure and logistics from Uber and Lyft, and deep policy and regulatory expertise. People who used to work at the EPA or CalRecycle, the California waste organization that governs all of waste in California. Like, we built a very different team because of the complexity of the problem and actually how many surfaces it touches. Like, we're not just building a consumer company.
No.
We're also working with cities and towns. We're working with farmers. Like, it's a much more complex business than we did at Nest.
Did that excite you, having done, again, I don't want to say that like Apple stuff, thermostats are more, the surface area is smaller, right? It just is. Like,
That's right.
At this stage in your life, as a dad of young kids, like taking on this operational complexity, was that exciting? Was it imposing? I'm curious. Again, my podcast has far less operational complexity than yours does, but I still try to consider every day, like, how do I get home on time? I'm curious about that, like how you attack that stage of your life with this.
It's part of the reason why I'm doing it. I could have stayed as a full-time investor, philanthropist. Like, that was fun. I was really enjoying it. But the reality is, like, again, like to your first question when we first got out, like, I have a particular set of skills.
Yeah.
And, you know, you got to apply it to these kind of problems. And the fact that this is like the double black diamond of all startups, even more interesting to go do.
Yeah.
And high impact, but also really big business. We all deal with trash every single day.
Sure.
Cities and towns spend like $200 billion a year in the US managing it. It's a big business. Like, to think like the next $1 trillion company could be a waste management company blows my mind, but is very possible.
Because again, it comes down to this idea, and you know, it's like I have been incredibly reluctant to work with advertisers because it turns out when you build a whole business and position on top of a horse or on top of a soapbox, yelling at people to do better, you can't just take crypto money or offset money or any of this shit, right? You're just like, damn it. But there are things we all interact with every day, and there's things we all need. We all need toilet paper, and we all need underwear and socks and stuff like that. And as opposed to me just saying like, no, go away to these people, there are some exceptional people and companies trying to do the right thing because they realize we all need these things and they're trying to do it. So I reach out to the who gives a craps and companies like this who are trying to do the right thing. But it's funny, the young woman who managed our editorial stuff, she's Canadian, which means she's better than me. She's better than me for 50 different reasons, but that's one of them. But, she takes it as such a personal offense that, again, like toilet paper is mostly still virgin old forest trees from Canada. And she's like, how? Like, how have we not just straight up said, like, you can't do it anymore,
Yeah, that's right. It's not allowed.
It seems like there's both that kind of low-hanging fruit for stuff we interact with every day, but these things where you go, look, if we're going to go on this journey and do the trash can, the trash can is such a small piece of the puzzle, right? Building this trash can,
that's right.
Not to sneeze at the design of this product, which I can't wait to get. It's like you have unlocked a whole different thing here.
That's right. And part of my thinking on this is that the design is really the gateway drug. It's like, oh, like, that looks cool. Like, I want to learn more about it. Or I want that for my kitchen. And it starts to get you thinking and learning more. And then you're like, oh, gosh, I didn't realize how big this problem was. Or it starts to pull you in. And we saw this with Nest. Like, there were lots of thermostats before Nest. And you mentioned Ecobee. Ecobee came before Nest.
Did they really?
And they did. They were a really nice Canadian company. And at the time, let's call it 2010, they were making white plastic boxes that required a lot of installation help to get it installed. And we're like, oh, like if we make a product that's beautiful and easy to use that people want, then it gets them in, it gets them hooked. It's like, it works. Like, think about Tesla and like what EVs are doing to the auto industry today. They look better, they drive better, and you're like, I want it because it's a better car.
It's very difficult to drive an EV and then go back to a gas station or drive a gas car because it's just, again, it's a better burger, right? It just is fundamentally. And I think this is, and imagine, again, with everything you've done with Insight and all your philanthropy, like you've encountered the gatekeeping in the climate battles here of like personal versus systemic and then this doesn't count, but this doesn't actually do anything. And where does organizing play a role and what does that mean anymore? And it's frustrating because it ignores the social element of the fact that we are social creatures and getting someone's foot in the door is getting one house in the neighborhood in the door, et cetera, et cetera. And that's,
and then they tell their friends.
Yeah.
Like that's talking about organizing. Like that's how organizing happens. Like someone says like, I believe in this. I want to see change happen. And they call 10 friends and those 10 friends call 10 friends. And then before you know it, you have a movement. Like I think about like some of the great movements of the last decade, like the Sunrise Movement. Like it's a great example of like individual action driving collective action, which then drives systems change. And like that works. And kind of with a consumer products hat on, we think about like the early adopter that maybe cares about climate and actually thinks about what they purchase every day.
Sure.
And those people then telling their friends that, you know what, like there's no going back. Like once you try Mill, there's no going back to stinky trash. And then they tell their friends. And we saw this in Essen. Like before you know it, you're in tens of millions of households.
It's frustrating because what it does is it just like, it ignores the entire history of marketing and the way these things have always worked regardless of the product, whether it's terrible for the environment. Like look at cigarettes, look at the history of advertising. Like it fucking works. And that's the thing. It's like, you're talking, I mean, the thermostat was the thing. I would show people and they're like, that's cool. And I'm like, yeah, you know what's great is like, I don't wake up and it's like 84 degrees in my bedroom anymore because this thing's smart. And people are on their phones going like, order as fast as I can. No one wants the leaky trash bag anymore where you're going like, what did we eat this week that is leaking through that bag? Like, could it kill us? The second
no one says, I want more chores.
Yeah.
Like, that's not something people say.
Yeah. What's a great quote from the Vince Vaughn movie? Like, I want you to want to do the dishes. No one wants to do that. I mean, I like doing the dishes, but like, there's a reason no one wants to take out the trash. Like, I like alone time in the driveway at night. That's fair. That's for an entirely different reason, to be clear. That's a different podcast you and I can have later. But the dealing with the trash doesn't have to exist, and we can do a better job. And like you said, someone coming along with a very specific set of proven skills that addresses not just consumer design, but consumer behavior, that can understand and empathize with the broader problem, it does seem like we need you to do this.
That's right. That's right. And that's why we're doing it. That's why we're doing it.
What are the biggest failure points in the next 12 months? Like, what is really keeping you up here?
Two big things keep me up at night. One is apathy. Like, are people going to give a crap? And, look, it's still early days for the company. So actually, like, people caring does matter. And, we've tried really hard to showcase why this is important and why people should give a crap. So that's number one. What if people don't care? Number two is, what if economic headwinds and inflation and recession get in the way of important climate solutions? Like, this is a mill issue, but actually this is more of a general climate
we're seeing in the broader
issue.
With interest rates and all the climate tech investing and all that. It's a nightmare.
That's right. That's one of my macro meta worries right now is like all this great progress we've made in the last couple of years with the IRA and the infrastructure law and investment. Like, is that all going to go down the toilet?
Yeah.
Because we can't get our shit together with the economy.
So how much do you think that applies? Because we got to get these early adopters, right? Not just the climate nerds like myself who like clicked reserve the second I saw the post, but that influential early segment that buys the Nest and that buys the Tesla and things like that. One would think that's probably the group that can withstand recession headwinds a little bit, but how are you going to work to try to guarantee that?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Spot on. So one is you think about like the folks who can afford to help kickstart this movement.
Yeah.
And there are millions of those households that can really help get things started. Like the Tesla Roadster customer or honestly, the early Nest customer.
Sure.
The folks who are catalysts for a new industry. That's one category. The other is with partnerships. So we've started our first partnerships with cities, Tacoma, Washington being the first one, where the city is going to help get mill into people's homes and help them save money. In most cities around the country, you pay per month based on the size of your trash bin.
Sure.
To downsize your bin, you save money. Who doesn't like to save money?
Sure.
So like there's a whole strategy around like, hey, downsize your bin, get mill for free. We think that should be enough to get us to our first couple million customers to then demonstrate this works at scale so that cities are providing it to everybody.
So again, though, and I think the partnerships is so smart. It's like, where can you identify these levers you can pull? Like you said, there are some severe headwinds coming. You look at a place like California where it seems so natural, enormous surplus 9 months ago, and now they're like, we have to cut everything everywhere. Yeah. It's a nightmare. And that's before they've dealt with the floods in the next 6 months, right? So that's off the table. And as we've all learned, like over the past 3 years, city and county and state budgets do not operate like the federal budget, which is a whole different conversation right now, right? How are you approaching, we've been doing a lot of work with Rewiring America on just like templates that homes and cities and schools and all these places can apply. Like, is there a standard set of sort of carrots and sticks that you feel like you're presenting to these places that make sense, or is Tacoma unique? What's working and how can we
get there? Exactly right. And we actually are kind of taking a page from the Rewiring America book. Like, there are dollars we're spending today. Like, we spend exorbitant amount of money as a society managing waste.
Sure.
What if we could repurpose some of the dollars that we're already spending, not incremental spending?
Right.
Can we take the dollars we're already spending, instead of spending them on managing waste, on throwing it away effectively?
Right.
Spend it on preventing waste. And that's a new concept. And one of the leaders on our team, Scott Smithline, who actually was one of the architects of California's waste prevention bill, is helping us kind of get this out in the world. And we think it's a winning strategy. Like, let's repurpose the dollars we're already spending. Instead of spending them on landfilling, let's spend them on feeding chickens effectively.
Sure. And it makes sense because when we spend them on landfilling, like you said, then we're like, at some point we'll figure out how to remove all that from the atmosphere. It's like, we haven't even figured that out yet. We can't even figure out how to pay that cost yet. I mean, like Stripe's trying, I guess, but it's like, holy shit, man. Again, this seems like not incremental.
The easiest thing we do is just not send the food to the landfill. And looking at a state like California, it's a really good example. So California is a net importer of feed. It's like, why should California import feed when we've got all this food waste we're going to throw away?
Right.
Like, it's just like, it makes sense. And, it's a really nice anti-inflationary message when we say, instead of having to grow new crops, can we just repurpose the food we already have?
Well, and that's the beauty of, and again, it seems simplistic, but when you see Patagonia's One Wear program and things like that, it's not just some cute idea. We're literally just not making more shit. It's very straightforward. Like, I don't need more stuff. I mean, as you know, probably as a dad, like all you do is walk around and go like, what is all this stuff in my house? Like all I do is walk around at night, like throw it in the donation bin. We don't need more stuff, much less like more costs. We're all trying to reduce. We're all trying to identify places where we can operate not just more efficiently, but more intelligently and hopefully with a bit of a moral and climate backbone to it. It shouldn't be that complicated, but again, we need someone who can really identify these pain points.
That's right. And like this team that we've built is dedicated to the mission. It's one of the things that I love about the company and has been unique about this team is everyone is doing it because of the mission, because they want to have an impact on climate and on humanity. And we've turned down great people with awesome backgrounds, with incredible engineering skills, for example, but we're like, I'll work on anything. Like, I'll work on the next crypto thing. We're like, no. Like, we want people who want to work on climate. That's key to the DNA here.
Yeah. What do sort of costs look like as you scale? Because you're taking on a lot, but also, I guess, not just hiring and infrastructure wise, but also, and again, I know you've come at sort of your climate work so comprehensively and your organizer work so comprehensively. I'm curious if you are involved in some way, and you can say or not, in, for instance, the fight to make postal trucks electric, because that is actually now part of your business. It is part of your company's scope emissions. And so I'm curious how much you're considering pieces like that, because sort of what we do and we're increasingly trying to do is help people understand like a portfolio of their kitchen sink. Like, this is what you give a shit about. Like, here are the different ways you can affect it. You can't just, again, like, this is a brazen example, but I do believe it's telling, it's not just air quality in your neighborhood, right? It's air quality in every neighborhood, which is the school buses and the post office trucks, but also the factories and everyone who lives near coal and trains and shit like that. Or abortion. You've got, yes, we need to help women right now, or hunger. Next, we need to feed people right now. We need a better farm bill, and we need, we need the child tax credit back and things like that. So I'm curious how you're approaching all of that.
Yes. I mean, like, in the mission to drive systems change, we have to get involved in all these things. And like, this is some of the benefit for being an entrepreneur the second time around. But like, we've built a policy team at Mill, and we were working even before we launched. Yeah. So we've got a small team out in DC that actually is working with lawmakers on the farm bill, for example. Yeah. And like, if you're going to reduce food waste, you got to think comprehensively. Yeah. And your point about the Postal Service is a really good one. The Postal Service is very efficient, but they've got to decarbonize too. And look, the drive to reduce food waste cannot result in more emissions. We have to be net good. And this is one where we've actually had to do the homework ourselves. There was not a good reference point. So we did a full scoping LCA even before we launched the company of like manufacturing and what does that take, and the plastics and the shipping and the postal service and the heating of the grounds and the energy it uses and all that stuff. And we had to do all the math. And even with all that, actually, we still save about a half a ton of emissions per household per year. And that's today. It gets better over time as the grid gets cleaner.
And it just comes back to that fundamental point of, and I think you either said it in an interview or maybe I know you and your co-founder wrote at least one post at one point, and forgive me if I'm misquoting it, but essentially we each buy 5 bags of groceries and throw away 2 or 3 of them every week. That's insane.
That's right.
But when you do the scale of it, it just matters so much. Forget like that is crazy. Think about if you left a bag in the parking lot and you just couldn't get it back. How annoyed you'd be for like a week. That's just on the other end, but it's 2 of them. Like, and again, do that at scale.
That's right. And I think about my grandparents who grew up in the Depression of 100 years ago.
Sure.
And like, how would they feel about the amount of waste we have in society today?
Sure.
Like they would never do things this way. And I think about like the previous generations where like there was no waste. You know, like whatever you didn't eat, like the chickens or the pigs would eat.
Yeah.
Like that's how things work in actually some parts of the world today.
Sure.
And like there's something to say about that. Like we used to live more sustainably, and this shift is doable. We could get back to some of the things that were good about how humanity used to live that were more sustainable, and we can make it easier and better. And we're trying to do this in a way that's no compromise. Like better for you in your kitchen, better for cities, and better for the planet. And it's a tough mission, but yeah, someone's got to do it.
Well, I think it's incredible. I love it. Again, it seems so painfully obvious, but again, when you do the math on it, you're like, good luck. Like that's that's a big lift, man. But like you said, and again, I've made this joke to a lot of people, especially my wife, who then just kind of walks away. But you know, in the 2050 water wars, when my children are like, what did you do when everything is on the line? And be like, I had a podcast. They're gonna be like, God damn it. I'm like, come on, man. But you know, you are. My wife and I have talked about this a lot. Like, again, because our kids are now 10 and 8 and 7, like, you got to actually walk the walk now. Because they ask me all the time for the podcast, they say, who did you call this week? And they're keeping track of that stuff. And they're curious and they're interested and it matters. And, you know, your kids are going to get to the point and go, what does the new trash can do? And why? And that plays a bigger part of my life every day.
We got to do it. We got to do it. Like, we don't have a lot of time to make this change. You know, people have been saying that for a long time, and like the worst of the doom and gloom. But look, like there was that day in California where we woke up and the sky was orange.
Sure.
All day.
Yeah.
Like this is real. Like when we have flood season and fire season in Northern California, like we gotta like we don't have a lot of time. So look, it's worth the best and brightest to work on these problems. And like, I've dedicated my life to it. I know tons of other folks are doing it. And look, like we can do this. You know, I'm looking at the progress we've made in renewables and electric vehicles. Like we're driving that change, but we need to drive that change everywhere. Yeah. And we kind of need to do it all now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what's scary about it. That's what's fun. That's what's empowering about it, is not just this, like, we're teetering on the edge of two very different futures. Like, it's not two things. It's going to be a muddled version of it all, but we could actually build something that's incredible where your trash doesn't leak everywhere, you know? That's right. And chickens have
just better.
It's just better. Well, I'm such a huge admirer of your lifetime of work and have filled my homes and my friends' homes with it and can't wait to get this. My God. I mean, we mostly eat fresh food, and then I'm just like, it smells. It's everywhere. It's driving me crazy. So, all right, Matt, I have a couple last questions I ask everyone, then I'm going to get you out of here. Is that all right?
Let's do it.
Okay. When was the first time in your life when you realized you had the power of change or the power to do something meaningful, like running for student office when you were a kid? Or it could have been when you first started thinking about climate stuff. It might have been with a couple Boy Scouts or whatever it might have been.
Ooh, the year 2000. Okay. So my now wife, we weren't married obviously then. We grew up in Florida, and we were out with signs campaigning for Al Gore in Florida. And if anyone remembers how close that election was, like I think about like how individual action matters. Like if we had knocked on a couple hundred more doors, or if we convinced a couple hundred more people, like what would have happened in the world?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the butterfly effect of like a couple more hours of our time and our friends' time, could that have done for humanity? And look, I was like, gosh, like we gotta keep working. And, my wife and I eventually did get married, obviously.
That's great for
you. We've dedicated our lives to this fight. And look, our efforts do matter.
I love that. That's awesome. I mean, again, like one of the world's most pivotal moments. And you were
a couple hundred votes. A couple hundred. And like, that's something like two teenagers walking around Gainesville, Florida could go do. 100%. And just, we could have kept going.
Well, Thanks for trying to amend for screwing it up for us all, Matt. I really appreciate it. Who is someone in your life that has positively impacted your work in the past 6 months?
Ooh. My partner, Harry, is exceptional. And I think about how this company Mill is going to be birthed, and having a partner who has complementary skills is so important. Like, it's important to have a co-founder. It's a lonely journey and It's really hard. But yeah, Harry is kind of the yin and yang to me. Like, I'm very instinctual, and Harry is deeply analytical, and like, we play off each other really well. And this company is me better for it because we're working together.
I love that. Not always the easiest journey to have instinctual and analytical, as I think my wife can probably tell you about me. But it really does matter in the long run. What is a book you've read this year that has either changed your mind on something or actually opened it to some perspective or idea that you hadn't considered before? We got a whole list up on Bookshop for folks.
I'd recommend The Alchemy of Air.
Okay.
So yeah, this is a book that's about the fertilizer revolution of 100 plus years ago. So we used to get fertilizer from poop, like guano off of South America.
Sure.
And eventually that ran out, and the world was faced with like hunger and how to feed humanity. Like, how are we going to get fertilizer? And some really sharp engineers and scientists created the Haber-Bosch process to fix nitrogen from the air.
Sure.
To create fertilizer, which ends up being an enormously bad thing for the planet and humanity and emissions and pollution.
There's a reason there's a book. Yeah.
But like, it was like a key step to like feeding humanity. And I think about like this next generation of entrepreneur and scientist and engineer who are going to create alchemy, to take CO2 of the air or create nuclear fusion or prevent food waste. It's a really good read, and like, it's actually quite inspirational, but also like a good reflection on like some of the crazy things humanity has done. Like, we used to get fertilizer from poop, and that was the only thing 100%. We had.
Yeah, because where else were you going to get it? It's also, I think, a really good lesson, and I try to apply this all the time in my home life and this work as well, which is, if it's not clear, like, there's just nuance to everything. Many, many things can be true at once, whether we want them to be or not. That just is what it is. Right. And fertilizer fed billions of people. You can look at all the charts at our world and data and how things have improved. And at the same time, just like the Industrial Revolution, yes, it built the West and the global North, but very clearly, like, the receipts are in, and there have been some trade-offs that we've got to deal with.
Exactly right. That's right. That's right.
I love that. I will throw it on my list as well here. Matt, I'm going to get you out of here. You have so many things to do. I really appreciate it so much, man. Where can folks reserve Mill? Where can they get in line? How can they support the mission?
Yeah, go to mill.com, read more, sign up, get up in our DMs on Instagram. We're always happy to answer questions. Yeah, we'd love to hear from folks.
Awesome, man. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time here.
Indeed.
That's it. You can read our critically acclaimed newsletter and get notified about new podcast conversations at importantnotimportant.com. You can also find t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, all kinds of cool stuff there as well. I'm on Twitter at Quinn Emmett or at important.imp. I'm also on LinkedIn, and you can find us everywhere else, basically. Send us feedback or questions, guest recommendations, whatever you've got on Twitter, or probably better, at questions@importantnotimportant.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for giving a shit.